There we go. The spring in my turn. Everything happened as with Eric, but I was careful not to go through the hole myself, for I knew that Eric was inside. On the other hand, the idea that I might be caught by Eric suddenly made me think of the death of Joseph Bouquet. I did not wish to jeopardize the advantages of so great a discovery, which might open my door because I didn't close it right. That's better. Okay, where do we leave off? I did not wish to jeopardize the advantages of so great a discovery, which might be useful to many people. To a goodly number of the human race, in Eric's words. And I left the cellars of the opera after carefully replacing the stone. I continued to be greatly interested in the relations between Eric and Christine Daae, not from any morbid curiosity, but because of the terrible thought which obsessed my mind that Eric was capable of anything. If he once discovered that he was not loved for his own sake, as he imagined, I continued to wander very cautiously about the opera, and soon learned the truth of the monster's dreary love affair. He filled Christine's mind through the terror with which he inspired her, but her dear child's heart belonged wholly to the victim Raudichani. While they played about like an innocent engaged couple on the upper floors of the opera to avoid the monster, they little suspected that someone was watching over them. I was prepared to do anything to kill the monster, if necessary, and explain to the police afterward, but Eric did not show himself, and I felt none the more comfortable for that. I must explain my whole plan. I thought that the monster, being driven from his house by jealousy, would thus enable me to enter it without danger through the passage and in the third cellar. It was important for everybody's sake that I should know exactly what was inside. One day, tired of waiting for an opportunity, I moved the stone and at once heard an astounding music. The monster was working at his Don Juan triumphant, with every door in his house wide open. I knew that this was the work of his life. I was careful not to stir, and remained prudently in my dark hole. He stopped playing for a moment and began walking about the place like a madman, and he said aloud at the top of his voice, "It must be finished first! Quite finished!" This speech was not calculated to reassure me, and when the music recommenced, I closed the stone very softly. On the day of the abduction of Christine Daae, I did not come to the theater until rather late in the evening, trembling lest I should hear bad news. I had spent a horrible day, for after reading in the morning paper the announcement of the forthcoming marriage between Christine and the victim Gichani, I wondered whether, after all, I should not do better to denounce the monster. But reason returned to me, and I was persuaded that this action could only precipitate a possible catastrophe. When my cab set me down before the opera, I was really almost astonished to see it still standing. But I am something of a fatalist, like all good Orientals, and I entered ready for anything. Christine Daae's abduction in the prison act, which naturally surprised everybody, found me prepared. I was quite certain that she had been juggled away by Eric, that prince of conjurers, and I thought positively that this was the end of Christine, and perhaps of everybody, so much so that I thought of advising all these people who were staying on at the theater to make good their escape. I felt, however, that they would be sure to look upon me as mad, and I refrained. On the other hand, I resolved to act without further delay as far as I was concerned. The chances were in my favor that Eric, at that moment, was thinking only of his captive. This was the moment to enter his house through the third cellar, and I resolved to take with me that poor little desperate Viscount, who at the first suggestion accepted with an amount of confidence in myself that touched me profoundly. I had sent my servants for my pistols. I gave one to the Viscount and advised him to hold himself ready to fire, for, after all, Eric might be waiting for us behind the wall. We were to go by the Communist road and through the trapdoor. Seeing my pistols, the little Viscount asked me if they were ready, if they were going to fight a duel. I said, yes, and what a duel! But of course I had no time to explain anything. The little Viscount is a brave fellow, but he knew hardly anything about his adversary, and it was so much the better. My great fear was that he was already somewhere near us, preparing the Punjab lasso. No one knows better than he how to throw the Punjab lasso, for he is the king of stranglers, even as he is the prince of conjurers. When he had finished making the little Sultana laugh at the time of the rosy hour of Mazandaran, she herself used to ask him to amuse her by giving her a thrill. It was then that he introduced the sport of the Punjab lasso. He had lived in India, and acquired an incredible skill in the art of strangulation. He would make them lock him into the courtyard, to which they brought a warrior, usually a man condemned to death, armed with a long pike and broadsword. Eric had only his lasso, and it was always just when the warrior thought that he was going. The warrior thought that he was going to fell. Eric, with a tremendous blow that he heard the lasso whistle through the air. With a turn of the wrist, Eric tightened the noose around his adversary's neck, and in this fashion dragged him before the little Sultana and her women, who sat looking from the window and applauding. The little Sultana herself learned to wield the Punjab lasso and killed several of her women, and even of the friends who visited her. But I prefer to drop this terrible subject of the rosy hours of Mazarin. I have mentioned it only to explain why, on arriving with the victim Gichani in the cellars of the opera, I was bound to protect my companion against the ever-threatening danger of death by strangling. My pistols could serve no purpose, for Eric was not likely to show himself, but Eric could always strangle us. I had no time to explain all this to the Viscount. Besides, there was nothing to be gained by complicating the position. I simply told Monsieur de Chany to keep his hand at the level of his eyes, with the arm bent, as though waiting for the command to fire, with his victim in his attitude. It is impossible even for the most expert strangler to throw the lasso with advantage. It catches you not only around the neck, but also around the arm or hand. This enables you easily to unloose the lasso, which then becomes harmless. After avoiding the commissary of police, a number of door shutters and firemen, after meeting the rat-catcher and passing the man in the felt hat unperceived, the Viscount and I arrived without obstacle in the third cellar, between the set-piece and the scene from the Roi de Lahore. I worked the stone, and we jumped into the house which Eric had built himself, in the double case of the foundation walls of the opera. And this was the easiest thing in the world for him to do, because Eric was one of the chief contractors under Philippe Gardner, the architect of the opera, and he continued to work by himself when the works were officially suspended during the war, the siege of Paris and the Commune. I knew my Eric too well to feel at all comfortable on jumping into his house. I knew that he had made of a certain place of the Mazenderan from being the most honest building conceivable. He soon turned it into a house of the very devil, where you could not utter a word, but it was overheard or repeated by an echo. With his trapdoors, the monster was responsible for endless tragedies of all kinds. He hit upon astonishing inventions. Of these, the most curious, horrible, and dangerous was the so-called torture chamber, except in special cases when the little Sultana amused herself by inflicting suffering upon some unoffending citizen. No one was let into it but wretches condemned to death. And even then, when these had had enough, they were always at liberty to put an end to themselves with the Punjab lasso or bowstring, left for their use at the foot of an iron tree. My alarm, therefore, was great when I saw that the room into which Monsieur le Victim de Chany and I had dropped was an exact copy of the torture chamber of the rosy hours of the Mazenderan. At our feet, I found the Punjab lasso which had been which I had been dreading all the evening. I was convinced that this rope had already done duty for Joseph Buquet, who, like myself, must have caught Eric one evening working the stone in the third cellar. He probably tried it in his turn. Really. Ah, dang it. Ouch. That hurt. Okay, hold on. He probably tried it in his turn, fell into the torture chamber, and only left it hanged. I can well imagine Eric dragging the body in order to get rid of it to the scene from the Royal de Lahore and hanging it there as an example to increase the superstitious terror that was to help him in regarding the approaches to his lair. Then, upon reflection, Eric went back to fetch the Punjab lasso, which is very curiously made out of catgut, and which might have set an examining magistrate thinking. This explains the disappearance of the rope. And now I discovered the lasso at our feet in the torture chamber. I am no coward, but the cold sweat covered my forehands as I moved the little red disc of my lantern over the walls. Monsieur Gichani noticed it and asked, "What is the matter, sir?" I made him a violent sign to be silent.